Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're
Time travel.
we're going back to 1830,
Oh, wow.
but through a text, of course. We're looking at the Book of Mormon.
Specifically, Nephi.
Yes. And even better, the original 1830 edition.
The OG, right. Which is fascinating in itself. It's
Oh.
like, because the language, it's a time capsule. It tells us so much about that world.
Okay. So for someone who's never even cracked open the Book of Mormon, what's the setup? What's the basic story we're dealing with?
Okay, so first Nephi, it starts with this guy, Lehi, in Jerusalem, having crazy visions, like an angel tells him the city's doomed.
Which, that whole thing, angels' warnings, that speaks to the anxieties of the time.
How so?
People were questioning religious authority. Like, who do you trust? Lehi's a perfect example.
Right. He takes his family and runs. Picture this. It's ancient Jerusalem,
Yeah.
right? And things are about to go south. We've got Lehi, he's a prophet, and he gets this message, a warning, really, that
From God, right?
that Jerusalem is, well, doomed. He's
Yeah.
basically told, get your family and get out.
Okay, so it's an Exodus story, kind
Yeah.
of.
Exactly. But instead of Egypt, they're headed to, well, the promised land. And their journey, let me tell you, it's got everything. Wilderness survival, angels, they even build a boat.
Okay, so definitely more exciting than just a walk in the park. But it's not all action-adventure, right? This is a foundational text for...
Religion.
Exactly. So what are some of those core ideas, those theological building blocks we see in Nephi?
You see, like, faith and obedience, huge,
Yeah.
obviously, and this warning against, straying from the path. But what gets me about this 1830 edition is how it's written. The way these ideas are expressed, it's like,
It's like what?
well, you know how music sounds different in different eras, like on old instruments.
Right. So you're saying...
The language itself, it's got this blend of the old and the new, like a symphony played on instruments from across time.
Okay, now you're speaking my language. So let's jump into some specifics. You've brought some passages. You've been researching this. What have we got?
We have to start at the beginning.
Lehi's vision.
Of course. Chapter 1, and let me tell you, it's a doozy. Angels, prophecies talk about thee and thou all over the place.
Yeah, it's pretty intense right off the bat, but I think there's something really cool about how it's written.
Right, so check this out. When Lehi's describing God on his throne, it's not just, God was there. He says, I beheld numberless concourses of angels in the attitude of singing and praising their God.
Okay, now that's an image.
I know. And this language, all this detail and grandeur.
Should have been opera or something.
Yes. And it would have been a hit.
So he has this massive, earth-shattering vision, and then
God gives him marching orders.
Right.
Literally, depart from Jerusalem, for I have seen the wickedness,
Yeah.
and I will visit them in mine anger.
Talk about a mic drop.
Right. And with that, the journey begins.
There's something both terrifying and exhilarating about that, right? It's like being told to quit your job and move across the world, but with, slightly higher stakes.
And that whole idea of leaving behind the familiar, venturing into the unknown, that would have hit home for those early American readers.
Because they were living it, right? Pushing westward, building new lives. I see the connection.
They're officially nomads.
Ancient world nomads, which I imagine makes packing light a little tricky.
You would think. And speaking of packing, that's actually a big plot point here. God tells Lehi to send his sons back to Jerusalem to get these plates of brass.
Okay, time out. Plates of brass. For our listeners who aren't up on their ancient artifacts, what are we talking about here? Why are these plates so important?
Imagine them like treasure chests. But instead of gold and jewels, they're filled with knowledge. Genealogy, scriptures, prophecies, basically, their whole history and their connection to God.
Okay, so kind of important stuff.
Just a little. It's all about remembering where you come from, even as you're heading into the great unknown, right? Preserving those vital threads.
Which is such a universal human thing, isn't it? That need to hold on to the past as we face an uncertain future. But getting these plates wasn't as easy as a library book checkout.
Not quite. This is where things get kind of interesting. We're talking reluctant heroes, a shady character named Laman, even a little sword action.
Okay, so like a biblical heist movie.
Basically.
Yeah.
Lehi's sons, especially Nephi, the one who's writing all this down.
Our narrator.
Exactly. They have to get creative to get their hands on these plates. I mean, they really go through it. And it brings up some interesting questions about, the means justifying the ends and all that.
Right, because we're talking about good guys, bad guys, and everything in between.
Exactly. And that's part of what makes this text so fascinating, especially in this 1830 edition. It's not afraid to get a little gritty, a little morally ambiguous. And this is where it gets kind of wild. There's family drama.
That's sick.
And an angel tells Lehi's son, Nephi, to kill someone. I mean, whoa.
That's a big one. But again, it fits the rhetoric of the time. Divine command, God tells you to do something, even if it's tough, you do it.
Would that have been a common idea back then?
Oh, absolutely. Think about the people hearing this story. Farmers in upstate New York, they're dealing with huge changes, westward expansion, what's right and wrong. This story gives them a framework.
Whoa. It's like this ancient story is reflecting their present day.
Exactly. And that whole obedience versus rebellion thing, that's huge in First Nephi. Lehi's sons, some follow him blindly, others not so much.
Which reflects the time, too, right? Like with all the new religious movements popping up.
Absolutely. The Second Great Awakening, it was like wildfire. People were breaking away from traditional churches, finding new ways to be spiritual.
So the Book of Mormon, with its prophets and commands, it gave them a way to make sense of all that.
It's possible. It's like, here's the story. It's ancient. It's from God. And it speaks to what we're going through right now.
And we can't forget about Joseph Smith himself. I mean, he's the one who published this.
Right in the thick of it. The burned over district, they called it. Upstate New York.
For people who don't know, what does that even mean?
Basically, it's where all this religious revivalism was happening, like constantly.
Yeah.
So the perfect place for a book claiming to be a new revelation from God to appear.
It's all connected.
It really is. Okay, so they've got the plates. They're trekking through the wilderness. What's next on the agenda for the Lehi plan? Because knowing them, it's probably not smooth sailing from here.
You said it. Buckle up. Because now we're diving into some serious symbolism. Lehi has this crazy, vivid dream, and at the center of it all is this tree of life.
Oh, yeah, the tree of life. That's a big one. Okay, for anyone who's drawing a blank on their Sunday school lessons, break it down for us. What's the symbolism here? What does this tree represent?
It's a classic allegory, right? And one that would have really resonated with early American readers. The tree, it's God's love, pure and simple. The iron rod that leads to it, that's like clinging to his word, staying on the path. And then, of course, you've got this, like, terrifying, huge building. It represents all those worldly temptations, the things that try to pull you off course.
Right. So temptation versus righteousness, clear choices, but not always easy ones. It's like a visual representation of the spiritual journey, pitfalls and all. But what I find interesting is it's not like everyone just sees the tree and runs straight towards it.
No, not at all. Some, they're drawn to it immediately. They eat the fruit and it fills them with joy. But others, they get lost along the way, distracted by all the shiny things. And then there are those who, they're holding onto the rod for dear life, but they're too scared to move forward.
It's like they know the way, but they're paralyzed by fear, doubt. It's so human, isn't it?
It is. And that's what's so brilliant about this whole allegory.
Yeah.
It highlights that tension between God's will and our own choices.
Right. Even with divine guidance, we still have free will, and that comes with consequences.
Exactly. And I think that would have been a really powerful message for readers in the 1830s. This was a brand new nation, full of possibilities, but also facing some serious challenges.
Yeah.
Moral dilemmas, social divisions. They're trying to build a new society, right?
Mm-hmm.
Trying to figure out what they stand for.
So they're reading about Lehi's family and their struggles, and it's like looking in a mirror.
100%. Okay, so we've got this book, right? Claims to be ancient, from God, all that. But there's something else. Like, have you actually read this thing? The language is wild.
Oh, yeah. From page 1, you're like, did they talk like this back then?
Seriously. All those these and thous, and the sentences just keep going.
Right. It's definitely not how people were writing in the 1830s, even for religious stuff.
Exactly. Makes you wonder if it was intentional, like trying to sound super old-timey, you know?
Well, there's that theory, that Joseph Smith was going for a specific vibe. Because remember, back then, divinely inspired language was a big deal.
Wait, hold up. For those of us who weren't, like, alive in the 1830s, what's that all about?
So people believed God spoke differently, that prophets, holy books, they had a special way of using words. It wasn't just regular talk.
I guess the King James Bible would be a good example.
Exactly. That formal, almost untouchable language, it gave it authority. But there was also this growing interest in, like, mystical experiences, visions, prophecies, and they came with their own kind of language. Very powerful, emotional.
The Book of Mormon would have tapped into that.
Totally. It's like, here's this ancient text with language to match and it's telling us what to do.
It makes you think, right.
And that's why studying the Book of Mormon is so interesting. It makes those claims. Ancient origins, special messages. We got to look at it from all sides.
Right. Okay, so we've talked language, we've talked context. What about the actual story in First Nephi? What are the big themes, especially for someone into history and religion?
Okay, well, one that jumps out is prophecy. Lehi's visions, right at the start, that's all about God revealing the future.
And that would have been a big deal back then, right?
Huge. Think about it. America's brand new, still figuring things out. This idea that they're part of God's big plan, that he's guiding them, it's comforting.
Like we were saying before, it's an origin story.
Totally. And that whole chosen people thing, America in the 1830s was all about that, manifest destiny and all. They were expanding west, pushing boundaries.
And the Book of Mormon, with its stories of people coming to America, it, like, backed that up.
Exactly. It's like this weird mix of ancient history and contemporary politics.
What else?
Oh, remember Nephi and that whole killing thing? That ties into another big theme, obedience versus rebellion.
Right. Like, do you always follow God's commands, even if they seem wrong?
Exactly. Lehi and his family, they're constantly being tested. And their choices have huge consequences. It's like a morality tale for a nation figuring out its values.
And during the Second Great Awakening, people were questioning everything. So this idea of authority, of who to follow, it was like super relevant. So we've got prophecy, chosen people, good versus evil, and all this happening in this really specific time in American history. It's kind of a lot.
And we're just scratching the surface, really. But I think it shows how the 1830 Book of Mormon, it's not just some relic of the past. It's very much a product of its time. It shows us what people were worried about, what they hoped for, even the political stuff going on.
It's like you said, it's a mirror. Early America is staring right back at us.
Exactly. And for anyone listening who's into history and religion, I mean, this is a gold mine. It shows how a book, even one that says it's from God, is still shaped by the world it's written in.
You think about that whole divine language thing again.
Yeah. And that's what's so cool about this. It's not just like, oh, an old book. It's about real people, their lives, their beliefs. It all matters. And if our listeners take away one thing from this, I hope it's that. The 1830 Book of Mormon, it's not just a religious text. It's a way to understand American history, the power of belief, what shaped the country.
It does make you wonder, though,
Yeah.
what would those early readers think about America today? I mean, we're talking about a global superpower now, not some new country finding its way.
That is a great question. And it shows how much the Book of Mormon is still relevant. It sparks debate, people find inspiration in it, and it makes us really think about history and faith.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Wilderness escapes, family drama, theological debates. It's a lot to pack into one book.
No kidding. And speaking of packing, this is where those themes we've been talking about, faith, obedience, even rebellion, they really come to a head, as they're trying to establish this new life. Because let's be real, reaching the promised land doesn't magically solve all your problems, right?
You'd think, right. But no. In fact, that's when things can get even more complicated.
Because they've got to figure out how to actually live together, build something new. After all that.
It's like they traded the wilderness for a whole new set of challenges.
Exactly. So where do we leave the Lehi family as they're setting up shop in this new land?
Well, remember that dream Lehi had? With the tree of life, the iron rod, that big scary building? That becomes a major point of contention.
Because even now, they can't agree on what it all means.
Exactly. Some, like Nephi, they're all about following God's every word, staying super close to that metaphorical tree. But others, they're ready to branch out, so to speak.
But which, relatable. It's that age-old tension, right? Between staying on the straight and narrow and wanting to explore, maybe test the boundaries a little.
Absolutely. Except in this case, it's not just about, teenage angst. Their choices have real consequences. They're shaping the future of their family, their community, everything.
Right, because this isn't just an ancient family drama anymore. It's a blueprint for a new society. And that's where those parallels to early America get really interesting.
Totally. Imagine you're reading this in the 1830s. You're in this new nation full of potential, but also uncertainty. And here's Lehi's family, grappling with those same questions. How to stay true to their beliefs while adapting to a new reality. How to build unity when everyone's got different ideas.
They're looking at Lehi's family and seeing their own struggles reflected back at them.
Exactly. And it's not just the story itself, right? Remember, we're looking at the 1830 edition here, and the language, it's like a bridge between those two worlds.
It's like you were saying before, like hearing two conversations at once, one ancient, one modern.
Exactly. You've got these formal King James Bible-esque phrases right alongside everyday expressions, almost slang.
It's almost like the text itself becomes this microcosm of early America, this blend of old and new, sacred and secular, all trying to figure out how to fit together.
Right. And what's amazing is, even though it's rooted in this specific time and place, it still resonates today.
Exactly. Because those struggles, those questions about faith, family, building a better future, they're timeless.
And I think that's the power of a deep dive like this, right? We're not just digging into the past. We're uncovering truths about ourselves, about the human experience that transcend time and place.
It's like this ancient text becomes a mirror, reflecting our own questions and anxieties back at us.
And hopefully it gives us a new perspective on those challenges, new tools for navigating our own journeys.
Beautifully said. And on that note of timeless truths and unexpected connections, we've reached the end of our deep dive. But for our listeners, I hope this is just the beginning. If this conversation has sparked your curiosity, go explore. Track down a copy of the 1830 edition, crack it open, and see what resonates with you. Trust me, it's worth the deep dive. Until next time.